class. Today we are going to be talking about yeast breads, and I know we've talked a little bit, but let's do some reviewing, shall we? So since we're in the sandwich unit, we're going to be making some pizza, because technically pizza is a sandwich. A sandwich is anything that involves bread that is used to make fillings more portable. So think of a slice of pizza. Instead of, carrying around pepperoni and cheese and whatnot, we put it on some bread and we can carry it with us wherever we go. So here we go. Now, first thing with yeast breads that you have to understand is gluten. So gluten is the combination of two proteins that happen to be just naturally in flour, in wheat flour. And when we want a bread, like a yeasted bread, we want to build up as much gluten as we can. So the two proteins, one is gliadin, one is, or gliadin, and one is glutenin. So when we add water to the flour and we start to knead it, what happens is these two proteins will start to combine into each other, the protein molecules. So it's kind of like these baby toys that I have here because I have a baby. So if the yellow one is glutenin and the red are gliadin, when we mix up the dough and push it together, we start kneading it. We start linking these together, and eventually we get these long protein chains that are supposed to be hard to break apart, that are long and stringy and stretchy, and this is what gives structure to your bread. The more of this that you build up, the more, the smaller the bubbles will be in the bread, and so the better. Well, there's a different texture. One's not necessarily better than the other. It just depends on what you want your bread to be like. Well, in pizza dough, we want lots and lots of gluten because we want it to be really stretchy and have a good bite. In sandwich bread, we want lots and lots of gluten because we want our air bubbles to be really, really small. In things like a ciabatta, where it has like the really big holes in it, we don't build up as much gluten. We want a really strong flour, a flour with a lot of protein, but we don't want to knead it a whole lot because we want those big air bubbles. So with pizza dough, we're going to knead it a good amount, and we're going to let it rise and helps to build the gluten, and we're going to use a fairly strong flour. So strong flour just means it has more protein in it. So if you'll give me a moment. Oh, by the way, if you notice, I got a tripod, so this is cool. No more shaky camera. Yay! So let me point the camera down at my work surface so you can see as I add things together. All right? I'll be back in a minute. Okay. So here we are. I've got all my mise en place done. So the first thing is we're going to, this is fairly warm water, we're going to take a cup and a half of the water and put it in our bowl here. And we're going to put the yeast, I don't know if you can see, sorry, the lighting in my house is not great for filming. I don't know if I can shade it so you can kind of see. That's half an ounce of yeast, which it's about a tablespoon and a half. Just gonna sprinkle it on the water, and we're gonna let this bloom. What that means is we are going to let the yeast start to activate in the warm water, because remember, yeast is a living creature. Put a little bit of sugar with it, not so that our pizza crust is sweet, mind you, but just so that the yeast has something to eat, because you're growing a plant, and then we're going to bake it and kill it. So we're going to let this sit for about 5 minutes. Okay, when 5 minutes is up, I shall return. Okay, we're back. So I let the yeast bloom for about 5 minutes. If you notice, I covered it with a towel because yeast likes a little bit dark. And here we go. Oh, it's nice and foamy. Let's just see if I can get a good shot of this. So there you go. So you can see the foam has gathered up at the top. That's carbon dioxide that the yeast is exhaling. So when we have a bread dough, the first generation yeast, like the yeast that we put into it, that's been like encapsulated. It's in those little like kind of round, like not tablets, but the little round pellets. They hit the water. It doesn't taste very good. It doesn't have a good flavor to it. at least not as good as the second generation of yeast. So when you put the yeast in here, it starts reproducing, and that's what you want. And that's what makes the bread rise, is the yeast multiplying. And those next generations of yeast have a better flavor. So the longer you can let this rise, the more the flavor is going to develop. If you let it rise for too long, it gets a little yeasty, and that can be not as good if it's like overkill. But you do want to let it rise slowly. There are tricks that you can do to make it rise faster. So if you're pushed for time, you can do that, but it will taste a little bit better, a little more bready if you let it rise for a little bit longer. Anyway, so here we've got our water and our yeast, and then we've got 2 tablespoons of sugar. And again, that's more about feeding the yeast than making the pizza dough sweet. And then you could use honey or, any, like you could use a liquid sweetener too. Honey or agave or something. And then we've got salt. Now, salt is really, really, really important in bread dough because without it, it tastes nasty. But if you put too much, it's going to kill your yeast. So the salt kind of does double duty. It's for flavor, but it's also so that the yeast doesn't grow too much too fast. So we're going to set this, well, we're going to sprinkle it in. Okay, so here's, I'm going to whisk. Okay, after this point, my whisk's job is done. Get rid of it, put it in the sink. Don't try to stir yeast bread dough with a whisk because you're just gonna muck up the whisk and it's not gonna stir it well. Okay. All right, now this is 3 cups of flour. So in the bottom, well actually I mixed it together, but I've got 1 cup of bread flour because it's got more protein in it, and I've got 2 cups of all-purpose. The recipe calls for about 4 cups of all-purpose. And so I'm going to add in 1 more cup at the end, and I substituted 1 cup of bread flour in because I want that extra protein in there, the extra gluten. Okay, so I'm just going to gently stir this together. Then at the end, I'll go ahead and add that last cup. If it's necessary. With flour, the more protein that a flour has in it, the more water it's going to absorb. And so since I added the bread flour, I may actually not need as much flour. And that actually looks to be the case. Okay, so there's my dough. Now, of course, it's a yeast bread, right? So we need to let it proof. And what that means is we're going to let it sit, and we're going to let the yeast grow and multiply. And it's going to expand those gluten strands that we've built a little bit of. We didn't do a ton of kneading yet, but it's going to expand those strands, and when it stretches and we punch it down and then we shape it, that helps to form those gluten strands. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to transfer this, because right now it's kind of a mess. So I can get a good angle. There you go, you can see it's kind of a mess. We're going to transfer it to a clean bowl that we're going to oil so that it comes out nice. Okay, Google, stop the timer. Okay, so there's I'm using olive oil, and you could use a paper towel for this if you can find paper towel. It's a precious commodity these days. Use your hand too if you aren't too afraid of using your hands for stuff. All right. Now I'm actually going to add just a little bit more flour to this before I put it in. Okay, so this is another, about ½ cup of the bread flour. Just going to sprinkle a little bit on top. Again, I'm going to be judicious. I don't want this to be like a super stiff dough because we're going to toss it. And I want it to be able to stretch. But I do want it to have enough flour that it will have a good structure so that it won't tear while I'm stretching it, and I'm tossing it. Okay, I'll go ahead and mix it with my hands a little bit. Bakers use their hands a lot, so don't be afraid to get your hands into your dough. What I'm doing is I'm just kind of filling out for like sticky spots, and I'll pat a little flour into like the sticky spots, and I want it to be kind of round on top. Again, I don't want to knead it tons and tons, just enough to get it into the ball. Okay, still a little sticky, a little shaggy. So, going to now put this into the oiled bowl, and I'm going to put it down so I've got my kind of smooth side. I'm going to drop that down in, roll it around a little bit so that the oil coats it, and then flop it over so that the top is covered with a little bit of oil so that it doesn't dry out. Because if the top dries out, it can't really rise very well because it gets kind of a skin on top. Okay, so I'm stuck on my fingers, just gonna tuck that under, and there we go. So we're gonna let this rise until it is double, and then we're gonna punch it down, and I'll show you how to shape and how to bake your pizza. All right, guys, we're back. Sorry, I have this kind of set up to catch down what's going on down here, so I'm crouching. So here is our dough that's risen. It's been a little over an hour. Obviously, nap time ended. We have our cooking buddy back. So I'm gonna gently take the plastic wrap off, and we're gonna punch it down. We've got a little flour left here. Again, sorry, my lighting in the house is not meant for cooking videos. If you don't want to get it all over your hands, you can just flour them up a little bit. Okay, so we're gonna punch it down. I'm gonna let it rest for a minute, then we will go ahead and shape it. Okay, I'm going to spread this out. Pretty evenly. And just pour it right there and let it rest, okay? For, about 5 minutes. And then we will be back. And this is actually gonna make, you can make 2 pizzas that are about that big around, maybe like 10, 12 inches, or you can make, smaller ones, individual ones, if you want like personal pizzas for your family. So I will return when this has rested for 5 minutes. Oh, right, and we're back. I think I like this angle a little better. So, so this is rested. We're gonna kind of pat it a little bit. I'm gonna cut it into, I think I'm gonna make 4 pizzas, because I like them real thin, okay? All right, so I want these to start out very circular, because that's gonna have to keep them circular. So we'll pull up the one that I'm working with first, get it a little floury, not too floury. If there's any like kind of big blobby spots, I'll kind of roll it out with the pin, but this is pretty good. Okay. Angle the camera up a little bit. And before I start tossing, I'm going to prepare one of these. And this is called a pizza peel. And if you're gonna do artisan bread, like the really crusty bread on the outside, you wanna get one of these. Or if you wanna do like pizza like this. So I'm gonna sprinkle some semolina flour on the pizza peel, and that's to help keep it from sticking. Because I'm gonna have to transfer this. I can't leave it on this to bake. So I'm gonna have to transfer into the oven, and it's a good ample amount. It does kind of make a mess in the oven. Like, you will have to brush this out of your oven after we do this. Okay, I want it nice and even, and I don't want any spots where there's not semolina because it'll stick. So let me take the camera here and show you what I've got going on, because you have to bake this on a pizza stone. So mine is kind of takes up the bottom of the oven there, which I like because it's a little bigger. Usually they're round, but I like the square ones. Okay, so let me set the camera here, and we can toss. Sorry, there's a lot going on in the background here. Okay, so now to toss your dough, what you want is you want to start off with your wrists crossed like this, and you just want to kind of throw the pizza up and uncross at the same time, okay? Uncross at the same time. But you don't want to stick your fingers out, because your fingers will go right through the dough and make a bunch of holes. Then your sauce falls off, okay? Now, this is already pretty thin because my dough is pretty loose. I didn't add a whole ton of flour at the end, so I didn't get a whole lot of tosses in, but you can kind of stretch it where there's thick spots. So there are parts of this dough that is thin enough to read a newspaper through, which is what we kind of want. Okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna take it, throw it right on top of my pizza peel. I said I'll reset the camera for the next one so you can see better. Okay, so here it is. You want it to, you shake it a little bit, you want it to move. And you don't want to overload the toppings because that's gonna kind of bog it down and let it not move as freely. Again, we'll switch up the angles with the next one. Okay, we got our mozzarella. If you don't have mozzarella, you can use other cheese, but this is the sort of traditional. Sorry, this has been frozen, so it's a little blobby. Just kind of break up those big spots. I'm trying not to buy too many ingredients here. So this is last year's cheese. Okay, so we are going to now transfer this into the oven onto the baking stove. I can't honestly remember how long to do it. Should have looked at my recipe, but I did not. All right, so if you haven't overloaded it, then you can just kind of slide it on in. There you go. Okay. Now when this is done, what you're gonna do is you're gonna take the pizza peel and you're gonna scoop it, and it's gonna slide right onto the pizza peel if it's not stuck. And then you can lift it out of the oven, which I'll show you as soon as it's done. All right, we'll be back. Well, let me show you the because you couldn't really see all the steps because I angled the camera stupidly. So come back over to our dough one more time. Okay, so this is actually attempt number 3. We did we recorded the second one and it didn't record. So this is number 3. So what I've done is I've taken our dough. This is what it looks like as it kind of sits. And I've kneaded in a little bit more flour so that I can show you the tossing a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is just kind of pat it down with a rolling pin so that it's a disc. It's not as traditional, but it works. At pizza restaurants, they will have what's called a sheeter, which is a large machine. They use it on Cake Boss, if you ever watch Cake Boss, to roll out the fondant. Fondant, not fondant. You're not from New Jersey. Anyway, so I'm at a sheeter at home. So we're just gonna get it. And you want it real even, otherwise it will not toss very evenly. Okay, now that gluten wants to stretch back in, right? So you have to convince it not to. Okay, so start with your wrists crossed. Oop. It's really important that you keep your body close to the counter so that if you drop it, it's a little hard when it first gets started. If you drop it, it falls on the countertop, not the floor.
Whee!
So practice this. It's gonna sticky. Spread my flour a little bit. Now, you don't want to get too much flour on here because when you toss it, what happens to things when they spin quickly? And there's powder on them. What happens to the powder?
It flies off.
Yeah, exactly. So you will end up covered in flour. So if you get tired of tossing, or you want some like one-on-one attention to your thick spots, just kind of stretch it by hand and circle. If you look on YouTube, there's a lot of videos of people doing this like super fast. It's really cool. If you do this all day, every day, on the streets of New York City, you know, you get pretty quick at it.
So is pizza popular in New York? Is that what you're saying?
Very popular. Okay, your homework is to go watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movies.
I feel like the 80s cartoon could be an acceptable substitute.
Well, sure, yeah. Alright, so this one's going to be a little bit thicker than my last one, which is alright. Have a couple thin one, thick one. Alright, so now we're going to place it onto the semolina. Sorry, you can hear the cooking buddy in the background. Now, you don't want to let it sit on here with toppings on it for too long because the sauce starts to soak through and it starts to stick. But we'll bring it over here and prep it. He has opinions about things. Okay. Now you want to be careful. You don't want to overload this with cheese and stuff and sauce and toppings. This one turned out a little smaller. I didn't toss it as much. Hopefully the next one the one that's in there will be done. So I can show you guys how to get the pizza out of the oven. Okay. So here it is. That's just about done. Here's the one, pizza number 2. Pizza number 1 is up here. And I would have liked it if the cheese would have gotten a little bit more done, but once your pizza stone is in the oven, you're kind of committed. You can't really move it while it's hot. Because they get fragile when they're hot, and so you don't want to crack it because they're kind of expensive. Also, it's really important that when you're using a pizza stone that you put it in the oven before you turn on the oven so that it can heat up gradually with the oven. And then when you turn off the oven, leave it in there until it is completely cooled down. Okay? If you forget and leave it in there, or if you forget to take it off once it's cooled, and you accidentally preheat your oven for the next thing you're baking, just leave it in there, bake on top of it. You can actually throw a cookie sheet or whatever right on top of it, and it won't hurt it. But taking it out hot can damage the stone. You don't want to do that.
Crack it.
Yeah, it can crack. I think this is done. So we're going to go ahead and pull it out. So you want to grab your peel and take it, and you want to slide it right under, and it shouldn't be sticking. There you go. Right on top of the cutting board. You don't want to cut it on the peel because that will damage your peel. And then I'll show you how to get it in the oven one more time. some finesse. It takes some practice. So if you don't get it right the first time, that's okay. If you don't have a pizza stone, you could potentially do this in like a cast iron pan, but you want something that's going to heat really well on the bottom so that you get a crisp crust on the bottom and you don't get a soggy bottom. And something that you can, there's methods where you can do it on the stove in a cast iron. There's methods where you can just, you can just put it in on like a cookie sheet and bake it. That works too. But this is what gives you the most like a pizzeria pizza.
So authentic?
So, well, it depends on your definition of authentic. The most authentic American pizza. Although they do this, like with the pizza from Napoli too. They'll do this in like a big stone bread oven. And, but theirs is super, super thin, and you actually eat it with a fork and a knife instead of slicing it like we do. Okay, well, we're gonna eat, and we are going to, should we get a shot of like they always do in the cooking shows with like the person at the end that's like, this is delicious.
Yeah, we'll get that in a minute.
Okay.
Bye, guys.